Among the deeper valleys and crevices of Ashina is a god, the Great Serpent, who inspires awe and worship in the denizens of this region. We know from various references in the lore that this being is considered a god. In Shinto, serpents are often considered to be a minor version of a dragon, and I believe this to be the case in-game as well, especially if we consider the lore around the cradling ritual. The holy chapter, Dragon's Return, description reads as follows. Undying, I pray for the dragon's return. Undying, lo, let us wait an age, for the divine air to assimilate the cold dragon tears, for the cradle to consume the pear of serpentine fruits. Let the cradle endure, giving him shelter, granting his return to the west. The viscera of the snake is used for the cradling of one of the divine heritage. This seems to at least suggest some kind of kinship between the serpent and the dragon, however distant, given that the viscera are actually used to bring the divine air back to the west. However, of course, the Great Serpent is very different from the incorporeal divine dragon that we meet in the game, for the serpent is a being that is very much based in the real world. In Japanese mythologies, thanks to their ability to shed skin and rejuvenate themselves, they can live to be thousands of years old. And we see evidence of the Great Serpent having shed its skin in the Ashina outskirts, which is a great piece of implicit storytelling. And it makes it seem more real than an actual god. And it may be a way of illustrating the Great Serpent's longevity and lifespan. I also believe that there are fur or whiskers on the body and face of the Great Serpent that we end up blinding, and I think this is another great way of illustrating, or at least making look like the Great Serpent has lived for a very long time, and indeed later on in this video I will compare the Great Serpent to what appears to be a younger version. White serpents are also synonymous with Benzaiten, a Japanese Buddhist deity, a goddess of wisdom, wealth and fertility, who is often sometimes represented with a serpent in her headdress. Serpents and dragons are often seen as her messengers, and she herself can often appear as a great white serpent, and I will leave a link to more reading on Benzaiten below. Given the great white serpent's association with Benzaiten in real life, I feel like it's very clear that this is the source material for the Great White Serpent, at least in some respect. And if it wasn't on the nose enough for you, there are a number of iconography that we could look at in the game to look at this representation. In the Gunfort Shrine, there is a really interesting statue. This shrine is dedicated to the Great White Serpent, and in here, there appears to be a female deity figure holding or cradling a white serpent in her arms. If this is meant to represent the Great White Serpent, then the scale of this woman certainly seems to represent a goddess or other deific figure. This type of iconography is then repeated in the deep shrine found within the Serpent Cave of the Sunken Valley, where we again see another goddess figure adorned with a serpent. But we will analyse these shrines in greater detail later on. I only highlight it to highlight the similarity between this goddess and Benzaiten from real life. I find this to be a pretty ongoing theme of some kind of in-game goddess, whether it is Benzaiten or not, being associated alongside the god snake. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be this exact god. It could be a fictional god within this universe. However, I definitely buy the association between this mysterious goddess figure and the Great Serpent, suggesting the Great Serpent is a form of, or a messenger of this female figure. Given that Benzaiten is worshipped for wisdom, wealth and fertility, it could suggest the reasons that the Great Serpent is actually worshipped for. I will now hand you over to Jake, the Ashen Hollow, to dive deeper into the worship of this beast.
Both of the Viscera items describe the serpent as a being who is worshipped in these lands as a god, We can find further evidence of the worship of this being, for the people of the valley would actually sacrifice people to this great serpent. A rat of Sinpo drops a note about herbs which describes a wedding ceremony, and it reads as follows. The snapseed naturally grows in ravines and deep valleys. According to the denizens of the Sunken Valley, such places are appropriate for offering oneself in marriage to the great serpent. If one wishes to become a bride, they must enter the belly of the serpent in the valley. Again, another wedding ceremony. Yet this time, instead of ascending to the divine realm, the bride of the serpent ends up as a snack. We can see the sacrificial spot deep in the valley where we encounter the serpent and the wedding palanquin where the bride would be offered to the great serpent. This indicates that the denizens of this region were so afraid of the great beast that they would feed it snacks in order to keep it at bay. To make it more palatable, it seems they would dress it up as a religious rite. Maybe that's just the cynical, and another way to look at it is that they truly believed the religious benefit of this ceremony and their god. Maybe this does explain why the god simply doesn't come above ground and attack Ashina, because he is satiated by his offerings and by those who trespass into his realm. Aside from the religious rites associated with the great serpents, there are a number of shrines associated with the great serpent. There is a shrine dedicated to the great serpent just behind Ashina Castle before the entrance to the Sunken Valley. This shrine is enclosed by Tori, which are gates that mark the transition into sacred spaces, as well as a number of Shimenawa that enclose the same. Both of these nice environmental details add to the idea that the worship of the great serpent is considered sacred in these lands, that to them, it is a real god.
Thanks for that, Jake. If for some reason you were not aware of the Ashen Hollows channel, I'd highly recommend you check it out, and I'll leave a link below for some of the best Souls lore content that there is. The shrine that we find at the entrance to the gun fort is clearly a religious chapel dedicated to the Great Serpent, which possibly suggests a worship amongst the denizens of this fortress and the Sunken Valley clan, as they are called in the guidebook. If we look at the 5th prayer necklace, then we can see that the Snake Eye bosses are the named commanders of these peoples. The name Snake Eyes and the positioning of the nearby Serpent Shrine is not a coincidence to me, suggesting that these women are the eyes of the Great Snake. The awe in which this great beast is held is so important to these people, and they no doubt see it as a true god. As mentioned, there is another shrine deep within the Sunken Valley, and this is in a cave below the surface, and this is where it gets really interesting, for this cave actually connects back upwards to the poison pool of the Ashina depths. First thing of note then is that the Snake Eye boss in the poison pools is not actually randomly placed, given the entrance to the poison cave below it. You can exit the Serpent Shrine, the home of a great serpent itself, right onto the poison pool. She is no doubt here because of the proximity of one of our gods, and is possibly standing guard over the lair amongst her soldiers. Second thing, there is a different great serpent from the great white serpent that we blinded before this point. If you look carefully, this serpent in the cave still has both of its eyes. This is not a developer oversight, as we see the blinded serpent in other encounters. This is just the first clue that this is a different serpent. Secondly, remember the fact the great white serpent had whiskers or fur as a sign of age, as I mentioned before. Well, if you look at this snake, it is remarkably smooth, and does not have any fur at all, and in my opinion it definitely makes it look younger. Finally, if this doesn't have you convinced, there's a gameplay perspective. You can still encounter this serpent over and over again if you have killed the great serpent in the valley. I've actually tested this and went back a number of times to see if it would go away as some kind of glitch, but it didn't, once again confirming that this is a different serpent from the great white serpent of the valley. What is also interesting is that this secondary serpent seems to be venomous and the source of the poison in the poison pools. If you attack its body in the cave, it reacts by projecting its venom through the natural geothermal vents, giving us no doubt as to the source of the poison. This cave is the perfect place for a serpent brood. There appear to be hot, natural thermal vents that would allow for a humid environment in which to sleep and breed. The implication that there can be more than one of these beasts is extremely interesting to me. It could mean that there hasn't been the same one that has been worshipped all these years. It also suggests that it can possibly breed, although we are now speculating at this point. For me, some of the best lore comes from the implicit storytelling of the shrine in this cave. The first thing to note is that again we find a number of enclosing ropes or shimenawa, marking the entrance to a sacred space. In this temple to the Great Serpent, we also see a number of bodies, as well as a bloodied shrine or altar to the Great Serpent. We see there appears to be again a female deity holding a snake, once again harkening back to the real world myth that I alluded to earlier. This altar to the serpent deity is heavily stained in blood, and in the hand of the statue we find the dried serpent viscera, which is an older organ of one of the serpents. The description of this organ tells us that these organs are worshipped as the gods themselves, and it explains its presence in this shrine and on the altar. However, the blood on this shrine, to me, looks very fresh and wet, and the presence of corpses here, to me, suggests the possibility of some kind of ritual sacrifice in honour of the Great Serpent. We know this happens in regards to the faux marriage that Jake described earlier, and I don't believe that it is a leap to assume that human sacrifice happened down here as well. I imagine a lot of you are also asking about the cave, and what on earth the blindfolded men are that jump out of the walls. There isn't much lore at all in these guys, but they seem to actually be corporeal humans, not ghosts, and the guidebook calls these rock divers. The only sense I can make of these people is that they must be here to defend the serpent, and that they are so fanatical in their worship of the serpent that they literally entomb themselves to guard this cave. They then ambush anyone who dares violate the sanctity of the serpent's habitat, which explains their aggression towards us. Ultimately, whether this serpent is really a god, the messenger of the divine, or simply a powerful being that commands worship, the Great Serpent is no doubt a powerful force in this region. The fact that we discover there is more than one of them, possibly hinting at a brood below the surface, is very interesting, as it suggests that they haven't been the same Great Serpent that has been worshipped the entire time. It also suggests something for the future, that even after we kill the older, original Great White Serpent, there is a chance that this younger looking one will simply emerge and take its place, with no one really noticing the difference. So thanks there guys, that was my video alongside Jake on the Great White Serpent. I hope you enjoyed it. I know there was a little bit of speculation there at the end. I just thought it was nice, the environmental details that we noticed, and I just wanted to talk about that as well. If you like this video, please give me a like and a subscribe, as I've got more content coming, and I really appreciate everyone's support. Thanks everyone, and have a good night.